Well, right, but if I can't hear you, it's not much of an interview.
I guess it's not. Although my brothers don't really listen to what I say, and they seem to still be content to talk to me. So,
That is true of brothers in general. So I have three kids. They're all adults at this point, but they still don't listen to each other. I mean,
yeah.
it's amazing how that works. Yeah. Oh well.
Boys, girls.
I have two boys and a girl. My girl was just promoted in the Air Force. She's out at Minot Air Force Base
Awesome.
in North Dakota, just like 40 miles away from the Canadian border. It gets a little dicey during the winter time.
I bet it
A
does.
tinge on the cold side.
I bet it does.
I've got one son who lives on my couch, but he's working on getting a PhD at George Mason. So I figure,
Okay, good reason.
yeah. Well, it's either that or you pay $11,000 a year for room and board at college. Now, when I went to college, I mean, it was like $2,000 a semester, I think.
Yeah,
Now it's $11,000. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
it,
This is
it,
ridiculous.
it's wild. I mean, I talked to a guy who went to like he was like an old school lawyer, like a country lawyer kind of thing.
Yeah,
And he's like, I went to UPenn. Said I think when I went, tuition was $3,000.
yeah. Penn actually has, most people don't realize that Penn actually has a really, really good legal program. Uh, People don't realize that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know nothing about nothing, so keeping track of anything can be tough. So
Mhm.
I empathize with those people, you know.
Well, yes, but you're a writer. So, two questions asked. The first is, do you mind if I share the video after we're done? The
Not at
video
all.
portion too.
No, not
Okay.
at all.
um, I forget what the second question is. It must not have been all that important.
Well, I'll say that if you need a yes, it's a
It's
yes.
okay. Well, it was, if I can't remember what the question was, it's not that important. I just want to make sure I get permissions before I share anything. So what I'll do is, after we're done recording, I'll record the podcast portion, clean it up a little bit. Usually doesn't require a ton of cleaning, but there are things like background noises and stuff that I can take out, thankfully. And then every once in a while, the ums, if there's an that's like standing out there by itself, I'll cut that out. But
Right.
that kind of thing. But but other than that, it's all pretty much straightforward. You saw the questions I'm going to ask, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. And they're meant to be very very open ended. They're not meant to be confining. So if we find more fun pay dirt, we may go that direction, but we'll see. Um,
Sounds good to me, man.
all right, let's make the magic happen, as they say.
Let's rock and roll.
Welcome to All Things Writing, where our goal is to talk about writing, writers, and the craft. I am Brian Nowak, author of horror, mystery, and science fiction novels. And for the next 30 minutes to an hour, we have the good fortune of talking to another amazing author with an equally amazing story to tell. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that if you like the show and enjoy what we're doing here, please hit that like button. Uh, Beat it like it gave you a dirty look, please. We need your likes. If you are so inclined to do so as well, we take donations to help keep us on the air. For the cost of a cup of joe, you can help maintain the website where we post the shows. You can do that by sending donations to me through PayPal at Brian the Writer at briannowak.com, or you can send donations to Venmo. My handle is at Brian the Writer. Remember, it's Brian with a Y. So, why do you want to keep me doing what I do? Well, let me just tell you that it is so that I can bring you guests. And my guest today is the amazing author of the book A Boy's Hammer. Please give a warm welcome to the show, Mr. Alex Grass. Alex, welcome to the show.
Brian, thanks for having me. Very happy to be here.
It is my greatest honor. I am not sure if you've listened to any of the episodes, but we have a tradition here on the show where we take a quick look at what cities are currently taking the top 5 spots for listeners out of the last 10 podcasts, we let our guests take a crack at guessing who's in the number one spot. So I'm going to give you that opportunity. Alex, what do you think is the number one city across the world?
Across the world?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's tough. You know, I would vet, like my first go-to would be like to just go to population and people who listen, you know, because let's see, where are the struggling writers? Where are the struggling writers? I'm not really like a bi-coastal elitist guy, but I would just throw out like New York and San Fran. I would think um, it would be up there.
Well,
Just
you're wrong, but I will tell you this: the population thing is interesting. I've never had anybody actually consider the population density of cities. It's Kitchener, Ontario.
what?
I know.
You gave me 100 years. I never would have guessed that.
No, I don't think anybody ever really will. But Kitchener actually is almost always up there within the top five. I don't know why. I don't know if there's just podcast junkies out there in Kitchener, but I really do appreciate it. We have a bit of a weird upset as Hampton, Virginia has taken back the second place, which Hampton, Virginia makes sense. Now, this is where things get kind of interesting. We have a three-way tie. I'm sorry, we have a four-way tie for third this week. We have Ashburn, Virginia, Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, here's the one that'll really shock you: Brisbane, Queensland.
What?
And Frankfurt, Germany.
So I don't just forget it, but I would never, I don't have the means, the tools analytically or demographically to make even close to a right guess.
Frankfurt, Germany is the one that's always interesting to me, but actually Frankfurt's a fairly dense population, so I guess that makes sense. I don't. I spent time in Germany, so maybe I have friends in Frankfurt that I'm unaware of. I
Okay. Oh, maybe could it be because of the how far is Frankfurt from like Ramstein Air Base? I'm thinking maybe because like because your kids serve, right? Or you have a kid who serves.
Yes, and I actually have served in the Department of Defense for years, so I know Ramstein. Been there a couple times. And I've actually been to Frankfurt as well. So, but there's actually a pretty good English speaking population around there.
Yeah.
But I say thank you to. I mean, it's pretty amazing when you think about it how it all shakes out. But I'm happy to see that the city right next to me, Ashburn, is still within the range of top spots. Way to go, Ashburn! You guys were falling off there for a while, but wherever people listen from, I really thank you for being on the show. I appreciate every one of my listeners out there. You guys are the best. I have the best audience in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting because the unpredictability of your listenership reminds me of all the ideas I had about who my readers might be when I first started out and how completely wrong I was about all of it.
Oh, absolutely.
And then it turned out that, you know, I figured, okay, you know, maybe my readers will be a little bit like me, you know, you're like middle-aged, maybe, late 30s. You've been a horror fan for a minute and, you know, you're like mid-tier fanatic about it, you know? Mm-hmm. But I'm telling you, the people at least that I've spoken with, and I'm pretty good about it on Goodreads, there are people who I have a lot of retirees, a lot of people, you know, in their 50s and older, a lot of people who are not interested in horror generally, but there's something about, you know, the story between, the themes about father and son and some of the other books. So you just can't, I mean, it gives me hope too, because I'm not big into like social engineering. It gives me hope that you can never really guess.
That, you know, you're absolutely right. It's interesting. I was at a horror convention once, and the amount of these older ladies that are like sitting there and they're like knitting and they're like writing horror novels. And it's like, no, we need to remove his liver with a plastic spork. What's the matter with you, lady? But
And then she picks up her cell phone. Yes, Nana will be over later. Okay.
yes, yes,
I'm
sweetie, I'll be there in about 10 minutes.
Yes, I miss you too, Pumpkin.
Like, wow, wow. It's true. I mean, horror is really a it's almost philosophically this weird equalizer in the sense that there's all this different horror out there that has to do or that has it just strikes people in different ways. And that's the coolest thing, you know?
Yeah, and it's also that the fans of horror are I never meet someone who's a fan of horror who really dips in and out, like loses the passion. I was a musician for a long time, and it just we got to a place, especially because my wife's from New York, my kids were born here. It's not always totally doable. You have to like go rent a room in a warehouse to be able to get a drum set, and it's just like a tiny bit more difficult here. So I can step away from music, but it seems like nowhere do horror fans ever really stop. They're always aware.
Yeah,
and,
no, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? We haven't even gotten to that part. We're already off tackling the hard topics.
Off to the races. Yeah, I mean, I was I think about it more now because my dad reads my books and he really likes them. And he's also like, I just don't know where you get this stuff from. You're so weird, He means it in the nicest way. And then I remind him that he took me to the premiere of Terminator 2 and Aliens. So I'm from a family. It's like a little bit weird. One side's a little bit weird, and the other side is pretty straight laced. My mom's a real straight laced lady, like she couldn't she's an attorney, and she was in the prosecutor's office. Before she was in the prosecutor's office, she could not recognize the smell of marijuana on the street, which is, I feel like, something anybody can, people who don't smoke know exactly what it smells like. And she'd be like, is there like a herbal remedy shop nearby or something?
Yes, Mom. Yes, there is.
Yeah. And then on the other side, you have my dad, who, like, in central Pennsylvania, not very long after segregation had ended, he was the only white guy at a James Brown concert, and so he was just like a bit of a weirdo himself. But
respect, Godfather of soul. Come on now.
Yeah, I got soul.
I mean, I don't. So I grew up in South Chicago, so we had a lot of Motown influence. So I grew up listening to what I consider some of the best music ever made.
Yeah. Did you ever get to see any of the greats play? You ever see? Because no,
I did see. So I actually did see Rosemary Clooney play once live.
That's awesome.
And she was still good. I was just before her death. But man, she was still really, really good. I saw ZZ Top play live, actually in Stuttgart, Germany, of all places. But no, I'm not a huge concert goer. I have a thing with crowds. I don't like crowds. Tend to shy away from the crowds.
I feel that. I used to be a big concert goer. I did see BB King twice. Tower Theater in Philadelphia. He had the whole band behind him, like the full, I don't know, like 80 something piece, like Count Basie style, backing him up. And it was, man, I was young too, because he died a while ago now, right?
Yeah, he's been dead a while.
Yeah, but it was, I mean, you could have taken any person from anywhere and put them in that show, and they would have understood that they were really seeing something. That was a guy who he was a pro, and he had the chops, and he had the voice, and it just seemed like he loved it.
I love that old school Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, just some of the most amazing singers that I think the young people today don't really understand. They don't get it. I think I think it's they're unwilling to listen because it's not the formulaic pop music that you see today.
Which is so funny because it was the pop music of their generation, that era. You turned
Yep.
on the radio. I mean, like all you would hear was big band, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
and it's not like, if you like if you take, I'm thinking like, I don't know, like My Prayer by the Ink Spots,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that was I think a 3-minute cut or less, and there were lots of
Yeah.
songs like that. Yeah.
There's a good there's a really good song by Ella Fitzgerald. I think it's Ella Fitzgerald. Um and uh it's about slavery and the hanging of a person. God, I can't remember the name of it though. It's a
That's what
it's a wonderful old song. Ugh.
I think the appeal of, it's interesting because you don't think about it. There's a lot of that sort of theme. I think of, there's a reverence for the big band era that pops up in horror. It's sort of strange, but I think of like Ghost Ship, or
Yeah.
Stephen, or The Shining,
Yeah.
and there's, for some reason, horror authors really have it in their mind to go and explore that era. And I don't know where it comes from. I mean, I like it obviously, but it's a fascinating era for writers.
I think part of it goes into there's just a feel of these darker tones, this deeper there's a deeper musical feel to big band that we don't see in a lot of other types of music.
Yeah.
You know,
Um, and it's amazing to me the guys who would dedicate their lives and they would go touring in a big band. I mean, God, they just made peanuts. They made nothing, you know. They made
yeah,
nothing, and they were all getting exploited too.
yeah. And these guys should have been paid uh, for what they contributed to the world. Should have been paid gazillions of dollars, but they were not treated well, and that's very unfortunate. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
yeah, it's bad juju, man.
it,
But
it really is.
to me, the gauge of a good song is, I'll tell you what. I have a middle boy. My middle boy is special needs, and to me, he responds to music. Like, to me, that's the gauge of whether it's good, because he has nothing but what, like, the tones affect in him positively or negatively, so when I put something on, like I like put on uh I think it's Tennessee Ernie Ford, 16 tons,
Oh
the
yeah,
the old
great song.
Union song,
Yeah,
16 tons, what do
number
you
nine
get?
Colt. Yeah,
Yeah. I put that on, and you can tell when a song's good because he just stops,
yeah,
and he's always moving. This kid is like, he pops out of bed at 5:30, and he's just going like a ramrod, like a locomotive, like a freight train, until 9 at night,
huh.
but you put on a good song. And the thing is he likes all kinds of different stuff. So to me, it's like, what music affects someone on such a, like, a pit of the soul, a base animal level, that's a good music, because that can sway anybody who's not yet fully inculcated by popular culture, and the expectations of your group that you hang out with, and how you associate and become like a tribe that likes a specific genre of music, you
Yeah,
know
yeah.
uh,
There's almost this. Well, we don't listen to that kind of music. Why not?
yeah. Oh, and I had that too when I was young. I had that too, you know
Oh yeah,
I mean, I was a metalhead, and I used to hide that I liked ballads. I liked, some pop ballads.
I am very agnostic when it comes to music.
Yeah.
I like it all.
Yeah. That's
Uh,
that's the way to be.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you have a really interesting background. Uh, First question, it's not even on the list that I sent you. Uh, what what do you listen to when you write?
Usually I have two songs that I put on repeat.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and it's not those two songs. It's one or the other. Um, Bedřich Smetana, the Volga River song.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, no, the Moldau, and not the Volga, the Moldau. Anyone would recognize if they heard it. You know, it's been in many movies, and it's just sort of like sweeping, romantic, and it's full of feeling, but it's also not harsh enough. There aren't, you know, the blaring brass, the horn section, you know, like Wagner or anything like that. So it's the kind of song that it can bring you to that point where you're starting to feel the goosebumps,
Hmm.
but it's not so loud and harsh that it's going to distract you at all.
Hmm.
And then the other one's a Terry Riley song, the experimental composer, and it's like, you know, I forget the name. I have it on my playlist, but it's, you know, something like, you know, Jupiter in
Oh,
C minor, third cycle, one of those, you know.
yes, for sure.
And it's an entrancing song. And that's if I remember to bring down my headphones, because I work real early. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I like to work early too.
yeah,
Yeah.
especially because of my boy. I have three kids, but my middle boy Joey, he wakes up real early. So if I wanted to get some writing, and I'm up before him. I'm up at 4 usually, sometimes a little bit earlier. And if I'm on a jaunt, because, you know, my old man just asked me about this. He's like, what do you do when you're writing? Well, when do you do your writing? Sometimes I won't write for a long time, and then I'll have a week, and 2 or 3 days out of the week I won't sleep.
Yeah.
It's bad, it's miserable, but I could write, you know, 10,000. Sometime one time I hit between 15,000 20,000 words in a day. And you know, it's not the best way, but it's how I can finish. Yeah,
It's how it, you know, however I found that however you write is really very much unique to you. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I take a lot of, you know, I'm a big Stephen King fanboy. Many
Okay.
people many people are, but I also subscribe to a lot of what he said on writing.
Yeah.
And I read that book on writing, and he says that people ask him all the time, you know, what's the secret? And he says there is no secret, and if there is, I don't know what it is. And other people who are telling you that they know are lying.
Yeah. No, that's 100% right.
I believe that
Yeah.
fully.
The I've read On Writing probably 3 times. Um, so you know, you have this extensive background, but how do you think it influences the way you write?
I think you know, when I was young, people used to tell me I was all over the place. You know, you can't stop moving, you can't stop doing different things. And, you know, for the people who don't or haven't seen, I guess, my CV, um, you know, I worked like at a car auction. You know, I used to do amateur boxing. You know, I was a, you know, touring musician, and then I went to law school, and then I was a clerk at, you know, at a constitutional law firm. I mean, it's like, instead of locations dotted throughout the country, it's like Johnny Cash said, I've been everywhere, man. I've done everything, man. You know, I've done a lot of it. And I think it just burned down any barriers that I thought existed between really anything. You know, people view life categorically, and it's not just that, you know, like your tribal associations. You know, what music do I like? What culture am I in? You know, and it could be, you know, like cultures that cross borders. Like, am I a jock? You know, am I a hippie? You know,
Yeah.
am I a cop? Am I a fireman? It could also be like, am I a guy who likes movies? Am I a gal that likes music? You know, am I a dude that likes taking mushrooms? Am I a guy who's a vegan? And I found that the most interesting thing to write about is high
Yep.
stakes, and and desperate situations, and the way that people who really have something to them, who really have compelling personalities and incredible stories, the way they handle that. And so I just don't divvy shit up. Oh, sorry. Can I? Are we?
Oh yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Um, so, for instance, there's a new book we're working on right now, and it's pretty raunchy, but we have themes of, um, you know, redemption after the harm caused by drug addiction, and very poignant moments, between, mothers and sons, and daughters and fathers who are trying to reconcile and come to grips with the things that they've done to hurt their family. But on the other hand, we also have Steven Seagal in like a third of the book being Steven Seagal. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know how hilarious that is,
Yes,
you know?
yes, yes.
So I think a lot of the advice that I got, and it wasn't just in writing, but um, I just never bought into it. Like in law school, they said like you can do this or you can do this, but you can't do both. And when someone tells you you can't do something, you know, uh, anyone who's listening, you ought to go out and explore first, because usually people have their own reasons why they're telling you. And a lot of the time it's just because I think they want to protect their ego, because the potential that somebody else could do many things and do something unusual is grating to them. And I think it's like, maybe that's fear of the unknown. Maybe it's like the whole crabs in the bucket phenomenon. They don't want to see someone, you know, scratching their way to the top. But I
Yeah,
just don't buy it.
yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. So I'm normally not a huge fan of like digging through somebody's background. I normally try not to do that too much because I like to focus on the writing, but I have to ask the question, mortuary school?
Yeah. So,
What? What?
yeah. Well, what happened was I came back from Israel. I had been working construction in Israel, in this place called Keturah, and that was a really awesome gig. There was an agricultural institute there, and the job was a lot of fun. But I was like, the person who was like basically my supervisor. Well, it was a kibbutz, so it's, basically my commie boss was replaced by another commie boss who was less cool, you know. It's the dude who had been overseeing me, his name was David, and he was just like an old hippie who had built a distillery on his front lawn, you know.
Nice.
And he was like, there was not, I'm convinced, not a more relaxed, chill person on earth, you know. And he was replaced by a woman who's a lot more like, I don't know, a lot of the Jewish moms that I would see at synagogue on the weekends, a micromanager. And, she didn't like me probably because I smiled. And I don't know. I mean, I was, I misbehaved. I was always doing it with a smile, but I misbehaved. So you
Fair
can't
enough.
just, so I came home because that didn't work out. And my mom's uh, my my grandmother, so my mom's side, her family is sort of split up scandalously in the 50s, because her two older sisters' fathers, she had a separate father, he was like a real scoundrel. Like he had like, secret families and that sort of thing. And
Oh,
and she had recently gotten in touch with one of the daughters from the other families, and I spoke to her over the phone, and she was really an awesome lady. Her name's Deborah Price. I think she teaches economics at a college now, but at the time she ran um I forget what office it was, but she had a lot to do with like running the Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science. And so like she just like offered offhand, she's like, well, if you're not doing anything, you come, you know, come to mortuary school. And like I was talking about, I'm just that kind of guy. I was like, well, hell yeah, I'll go to mortuary school. That sounds fun as hell, you know? So I picked like, a classic 20-something-year-old fashion. I threw, you know, all of my valuables into 2 trash bags, got into the, you know, the Dodge Ram that I had because I've been working construction at home too. And I drove across the state from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. And I was there for a good year, where I was an absolutely abysmal mortuary school student, but a pretty solid power lifter.
Well, it's interesting to me. I I can imagine that, you know, your clients, the people you have to deal with on a daily basis generally don't voice too many complaints in
You know,
mortuary.
they're pretty pliant.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but I'll say this, and
the customers, however.
yeah, I will say this: the level of respect
Mhm.
for the dead that is expected of you, I found uh, to to there was a high standard, and people were unwilling to let that standard drop at all. And there are all kinds of people there, and there were people there who are like, by nature and by their disposition, like, you know, not very reverential of anything. But there was sort of a, I don't know, it was like a facet of monk-like behavior by people who were not even close to being, you know, monastic. It, and that was one of those tiny things that like, gave me hope. Like, wow, people take this super seriously, you know. And usually the gallows humor is not done at the expense of the departed, you
Sure.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm and and of course, you know, there can be scandal, and I'm sure there has been scandal, but it's sort of like in any other group, when someone goes out and does something to make your tribe look bad, you
Mhm.
know, the other members are especially hard on them, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So, okay, so you have this tremendous background, and there's a point where you said to yourself, you know what I want to do? Gosh, I want to write novels. Um, wh- what at what point did that happen for you? Was there a process? How did that occur?
yeah, I mean, you know, the long story answer is that, well, I was always writing something from when I was a little kid. And, you know, I didn't think much of it at the time, but, you know, I used to like write bawdy poems. You know, my mom caught me with those and she was devastated. She thought I was like, you know, like a serial killer in the making or something, or a degenerate. I mean, my mom was very straight laced. My mom found the first time she found a pack of cigarettes. And like I said, she worked in the prosecutor's office. She said, "I'm taking this into the lab to get tested." I'm like, "That's
Oh
fine."
my
Like, you know, and she is like so sweet and so reasonable, but it just like anything that was taboo, she wasn't, she she did not give an inch on any of that stuff,
yeah.
you know. you know um uh and the short answer, and the answer for why I wrote my first book, my first horror book, you know, like just a couple years ago, is I was, you know, drop dead drunk, and like my life was spiraling out of control. My uncle, who for whatever reason I listened to him and nobody else in the family, came, picked me up in Brooklyn, brought me down to a rehab facility in Florida. And over the course of 3 months, I just had my mind changed about basically every single piece of existence and the way to think about the world materially and religiously, spiritually, psychologically, in terms of relationships. I just changed the way I thought about everything. And after that had happened, I read Doctor Sleep by Stephen King.
Yeah.
And Stephen King's it's pretty easy to see if you read his books. He's in recovery, and he's spoken about his struggle with drugs and alcohol. And Doctor Sleep so profoundly influenced me. I felt like I had um, a moment of clarity, and there were times when I was just thinking about sort of the supernatural, um, and I don't know. I just felt something, and it just hasn't gone away. I was compelled to write, I think, the kind of horror that wrestles, with how imperfect people rise to the challenge against Im, Im, impossibly strong enemies. Because that's what I believe, most good horror is about. You're facing down something that seems insurmountable, whether it's a supernatural creature like a werewolf, or whether or not it's a phenomenon, like zombies or a pandemic or something that can't be seen, like creatures from the spirit world. The idea of a human being combating something that it's not even fully perceptual, you can't even fully perceive it as a human being, and that the protagonist would still be willing to fight, I think already brings the reader in to look at, wow, look at the stakes here. And it's more interesting when the person who's doing it, I mean, most of the protagonists in horror, they're not heroes at all. you know you're talking
Right.
about I find that the best stories are people that are like really run down, and people that you'd think would collapse, and it,
Yeah.
it just shows you never know. It's like the thing with your listeners and my readers. You just don't know. You don't know what people will do. You don't know what they're capable of,
Yeah.
and you'll be shocked by how good they can be.
Yeah. I run into that every once in a while. I'll get a reader that comes up to me at a convention or whatever and says, "Oh, I loved such and such a book," and I'd be like, "I really didn't peg you for that kind of reader. Just looking at you." I had this big, good. I call him a good old boy. Came up to me one day and said something about how he's looking for books or something, and I pegged this guy as there's no way he would buy novels. He bought every single one of my novels. He's a truck driver,
Right.
and when he pulls over for the night, he reads. That's what he does when he is on his forced breaks. And apparently, his wife said, "Oh yeah, he reads more novels than we can keep up with."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they go to shows, and I'm like, "That's so cool," you know?
Yeah, it is so cool. It's awesome. These, like, the idea that these people, it's not only you know, I think that human beings respond to earnestness and passion, and so there's something about when you talk to somebody who really cares about something, even if you're not really a great listener, there's something about that energy that can grab you and hold you for a minute.
Yeah,
And I've spoken to so many, and I just feel afterwards, when I say that same thing, like, wow, I never would have guessed. I feel foolish, and I realize again that thing that I kept reminding myself, but once again I forgot. Like, you just don't know.
yeah,
Nobody knows. You have no idea who's going to like something or why.
yeah.
Like, I really connected with there's a guy down in Virginia, and to be honest, I did not have him pegged for a horror reader. He's a guy in his 70s. He's a old Dominican guy, a widower, and like, he's. I talked to him over email. He's like he reads every single book, and he has a a point of view that shows that he's been through life, that he's learned from life, and he's very common sense. And I just never guessed, that like an old Dominican grandpa would be reading my shit. I just didn't. I I did not. I
Yeah.
did. It's like the whole thing with like Frankfurt and
Yeah.
and and like Brisbane, Queensland.
Mhm.
With your listeners, if you gave me 5 years, I don't know that I'd put one of those down.
So we talked about the early morning writing process. Walk me through how you approach your writing craft from the technical standpoint, because of course, all things writing is all about writing and writers and how do we do what we do.
Sure. Um, I come downstairs, I make a coffee, I instantly start loading up on coffee and nicotine, and yep, there you go.
I'm out of
And
coffee. That's not good.
yeah, it, and I do not look at anything else. I mean, when I'm on one of these writing benders, I'm just in the window. I full screen the window. I used to do Word until one time I lost about 70 pages. And then,
Oh no.
yeah, it was pretty rough,
Yeah.
pretty rough, you know. Um, so now I do everything in G-Docs and I immediately share it with my editors. Um, so I open up that window, I full screen it, and the only time that I open it is if I'm going to research something. What I try to do though is I try to bookmark or make a note so that if there's something I want to put in there, or something I feel needs to be accurate. And this is something like, something minute, like who built the Panama Canal, or, what country was what, like when was it India and Pakistan? When was it post partition?
Sure.
Not those two specifically, but I just don't want to be wrong about it,
Right. I'm the same way.
Yeah. So if it pops up, it pops up. And if there is something that is not just incidentally needed for correctness, if there's something that I really need to know and explore, I will allow myself to go off and do that. For instance, that'd be something more like, I wrote A Boy's Hammer. It's all about Finnish mythology. I really need to know how the characters feel about chaos and order. Right. So I would need to break away maybe and need a full passage, because it's not just about, I don't even need, anything to quote there, but I do need to know how a situation was handled. For instance, like what sort of breach there was in the trust between, like the god of power and the witch who controls the world of the undead, to know what they would do in an analogous situation in the future. So I will allow myself to go off, but I try not to take too much time, and I really try to keep writing. A lot of people, they say they get writer's block. I feel it is legitimate. I try to write even if it's complete drivel, because I think that the motion will eventually bring you back around to something good. And even if I can't keep writing, which is something that rarely happens, I will, try and think about anything, like what would my character be doing during the day, like, oh, maybe I'll be my character and like I'm walking around, this the smithy that he has, like he's a blacksmith, and I'm picking up this hammer and that one. So it's important, I think, to just keep going, because if you let yourself stop, it's like working out. Like the second you take too long of a break, it's just going to be that much harder to get back into it. Or waking up in the morning. You take too much time. It's just a lot harder to wake up. If you keep hitting snooze, you're better off just, getting up and getting through that, half hour of bleary-eyed delirium.
Yeah.
Just,
Tear
just
that.
get, yeah,
Tear that band-aid off. Make it happen.
exactly.
I find it helps to have an automatic coffee maker, so the smell of coffee starts infusing the house, and then you're going, Okay, yeah, I know I want that coffee. I want to stay in bed, but I
Yeah.
think I want that coffee more.
Yeah.
So that's a good one.
That's great. Like the cartoon character who smells the pie and floats
You're
through
just
the air.
flying through the air. Yeah, that is literally me in the morning. Uh, so you mentioned A Boy's Hammer, and that is your latest book, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So now I personally will never spoil someone else's work on my show because I know how that feels, so I don't do it. However, the author can spoil whatever they want, so I don't stop them. Why don't you tell us about A Boy's Hammer?
Sure. Boyce Hammer, I saw this painting, and it's called The Defense of the Sampo by Galen Exeli Kalela, and he was a painter who, in the late 19th century, there was a lot of um, nationalist fervor, and not nationalist in the way that we understand it, but sort of a lot of empires were breaking up, so these countries were becoming their own countries. So Finland, which at various times had been like part of Russia and part of Sweden, was exploring what it meant to be Finnish. And so there were all these painters and all these writers that were bringing to the fore national works, and like basically like not drawing lines, but saying like, hey, there is a definitive Finnish mythology, and we haven't really explored it, and here's what it is. So this painting was so striking to me, because it's this old man, this like old like combination of sage and warrior, the weathered gray-haired muscle-bound Viking type, but you could see sort of distinguishing features. And you could see he was battling this like sort of this great hawk-winged witch, and it it seemed to me to not be of that era. I thought that I would look at it and see it was made in like the 1970s or something. And so when I found out it was made in the late 19th century, I was fascinated. I'm like, wow, this is a guy who seemed to it's like a unique mind in a unique moment in exploring something that he loved, that he felt had been neglected, which is the mythology of Finland. And so I started reading the Kalevala, and I found out that the guy who compiled it, so the Kalevala had been really just an oral history, very, very similar to other Scandinavian lore, especially in terms of how it was constructed. I mean, it was told orally, but it was a lot like the Norse Eddas. And there's an analog in terms of the gods. So just like how the Greek god Hephaestus is Vulcan in Roman mythology, there was there's Loki in Norse mythology, and then Luhi, who's a woman, but basically represents the same idea. Like sort of the deceitful trickster, although she's a lot more humorless. And then you have like the master builder. And then there's like these tiny differences. So like the master builder in Norse mythology, they combine together to sort of like fleece the master builder, the gods. And what was fascinating to me is the idea that it's not really about good and evil. I mean, they didn't view things that way because obviously they thought even their berserkers were in the right, and berserkers are going around razzing villages and like burning everybody, women and children included. But it's the idea of like having a stable society. So there's these fascinating things to me about the Scandinavian systems of law and order, where like it was totally fine. You could go, and if you were in battle, it was expected that an honorable man would die in battle. That's like what the worst thing was, to die of old age. And that was fascinating to me. But murdering somebody outside the context of war, they were so harsh about it. So you glean from this this view of order and chaos. And it seems to me that the uniqueness of this mythology um, to Scandinavia and to Finland was something that they looked proudly to because it was very different from mythology in other places. You know, it's very different from Greek mythology, but it's just as rich. You know, and it's not like sort of lost lore. You know, like what do we really know, for example, about like the Celts and the Druids? You know, not so much because they didn't leave a written record. You know, we know some interesting stuff, like we know Newgrange. They had a clearly had Newgrange and Stonehenge. They clearly had an understanding of astronomy, but
Yeah, right.
but like why is there no written record? Who's to say, right?
Yeah.
But so the Finnish nationalists and the artists who contributed to that movement in the late 19th century, they were lucky enough to have, you know, a written record. And I read the Kalevala, and there's just great stories in there. Great stories in there. And another guy, I didn't even find this out until I was like really digging into the book. Another guy who was really fascinated with Finnish mythology was J.R. Tolkien. And
Yes.
he even wrote about, you know, the penultimate tragic character in the Kalevala, Kullervo. You know, just sort of like a kid who he can't get a break, he can't get anything right. Everybody he loves is dying, and he's always making mistakes. And at the end, he's like, "Well, fuck it, I'm gonna end it." Oh, excuse me, sorry, sorry.
It won't be the worst thing that's ever said on my show, believe me.
Yeah, I try and behave. um,
So, you know, I'm always interested in character development, and your main characters, Alan and his mother, right?
right.
Where, how did they, how are you extrapolating those characters from this foundation that you're drawing off of? What's the character development scheme look like?
Well, so I I think that my opinion is that every great story has been told in one way or another, and that
Sure.
has nothing to do with originality. That has to do with how we think as human beings who are animals. And I don't think that that's limiting. I think that's actually freeing. I think you know, structure um, can take your mind away from overthinking and bring out new and novel ideas. And so I view them as like archetypes, and I've had all kinds of archetypes in my books. And you know, Alan is sort of like the naive and foolish warrior, but also, you know, the man child. And because he's taken away in this electrical, like sort of this trans-dimensional electrical storm, when they're flying over to Helsinki for his mother's business meeting when he's 15 years old. And he is sort of in like a stage of arrested development because all he does is, you know, bloody himself and massacre monsters in you know, the hellish underworld of Tuonela once he's transported there. So he hasn't grown, and he's sort of naive. And his mother, Lena, she lingers as sort of as a background character. It's sort of the something akin, I guess, sort of to the Madonna complex. He's been separated from his mother so long that he's over idealized her, you know, and the only important thing to him is to find his mother, to get her, to get back to her. Um, and it's remarkable because in all of his struggles, you know, he's been in this incredible place. He's learned so much. He's become so much. He's become this being that once he comes back to, you know, the terrestrial earth that we know, the things that he knows and the things that he can do are of unparalleled value. You know, he's like Superman, and it doesn't matter to him. He doesn't care about any of that. All he cares about is finding his mother. But he's thrust into the battle between not good and evil, but order and chaos by the deities of the Kalevala, the Finnish demigods who are working behind the scenes. And he does not want this life. He does not want to go to battle for them while the, you know, this evil witch Louis is taking over the city of Philadelphia and wreaking havoc on it. And they said, well, it's not really about what you want. We don't care. You know, it could have been someone else, but it is you. And you are the one who's been in hell. And you are the one who is capable of doing this thing for us. And there's just nothing that's going to happen otherwise. And the theme is, even if you do something completely unwillingly, if you do something reluctantly, you know, if it has to be done, it has to be done. And I think that that's rarer these days. Usually people want to see a story where there's, you know, like an elemental fairness that comes to the fore. But that I believe that that is not life. Life
No,
is
that's
never.
I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. I said, you know, uh, my daughter used to say, you know, like, but it's not fair. This is not something I say anymore, but you know, because I was a drunk and an ass bag 5 years ago, I used to say, you know, like, fair is a nothing word and a meaningless concept. And you know, people or characters that are great don't concern themselves with fairness. Oftentimes they think about nothing. They just move forward and they do the deeds. And so thematically, that's what I was trying to develop. Um, and it is sad. You know, I feel bad because I've known dudes like that. I've known dudes that it's just like they can't get a fair break. You know, even guys who don't cry victim, and there's lots of people these days who cry victim. You know,
Yeah.
but there's just nothing you can do about that.
I agree completely. I think you I don't actually cry about my characters too much when they're faced with something that is completely unfair. As a matter of fact, I normally have another character that turns around and says, "Tough luck.
Yeah,
Pull up your big boy drawers. Come on, let's get moving."
yeah.
So now explain the role of Detective O'Brady in the story, because I think that's really interesting. I'll let you explain him, and then I'm going to dig into that a little bit closer, because there's some interesting parallels between Detective O'Brady and one of the characters that I write. So
Sure. Detective O'Brady is based on a dude that I knew. Um, I mean, well, I guess I won't send my mom the link to this one. Right, my mom's second husband was an Irish homicide detective,
Hmm.
and it's largely based on him. I mean, one of the people who read the book told me it's like, yeah, I get it. It's sort of like, you know, like the been done to death alcoholic cop. And I never thought of it that way. I mean, it's true, the character is, but it was a real alcoholic cop that I knew. And it's a guy who, you know, he's stunted in so many ways, because he has basically two things in his life. You know, he has this, you know, his crippling vice, and then he has the thing that brings him meaning. I'm not even sure he knows that it brings him meaning, which is the intellectual exercise of being a good detective. But he's also somewhat of a phenom. He's sort of like the unusual, um, not even really blue collar, but just sort of like the unusual middle class genius, because his father had been a like sort of a hyper smart computer programmer back in the days where like the medium by which computer programming was done was constantly evolving. Not that it doesn't today, but you know, like really like going from like analog to digital to software, from hardware to software.
from cards to actual
Yeah,
inputting. Yeah.
exactly. And he's he's very unorthodox. He has he has a view of humanity and policing that's very far away from um, the other cops that he works with. But he's accepted by them. Uh, it's never explicitly addressed, but like basically because, you know, like he's a hard drinker, he can fight, but also he's sort of a novelty. Like he has a photographic memory. So every once in a while, like it was a thing they would do when he's, you know, with the beat cops, and they'd be like, okay, and they'd name a case from 5 years ago, and they'd say, you know, like verbatim from the trial transcript or something like that. He could rattle it off. And so, but where we see him is at his total decline, and he is for the first time starting to have trouble with memory. And he is brought in because when Alan appears basically, I more or less completely ripped off Terminator 2, where Arnold shows up naked in the middle of a lightning ball in an industrial area, and that's how Alan appears. And the circumstance is so strange, and they can't. Once the cops come out to get Alan, they can't find him in any database. He hasn't escaped from any, mental institution. So they bring O'Brady in to interview him, because he was sort of, before he was on homicide, he was in missing persons, and he was the guy. And there's something about Alan that really just touches O'Brady. You know, there's something he can sense. You know, O'Brady being an unusual person himself, and being a unique person himself, senses something in Alan that, despite all the crazy things that this, behemoth who has appeared in an electrical storm in the midst of a refinery in the middle of the night is telling him, he says, well, this guy doesn't think that he's lying. And it might be just the oddest thing, but there could be some truth to this. And so he is drawn in to the center of the storm, the very eye in the middle of the raging tornado, as the unraveling of Philadelphia and the rupture of society is beginning to occur. And he is a man who has the tools he is spectacular enough as a human being and a detective that he has something to contribute to the battle between order and chaos before the very end.
It's fascinating. I have a private investigator that I write by the name of Dean Cordain, and Dean is the quintessential PI, noir, drunk. He's a misanthrope. He hates everybody, and his pacing and his wording and everything else is that's where he draws that from. I actually had I have a noir publisher that read my first Dean Cordain book. I'm going to have them on as a guest to talk about, actually literally do like a live rip apart of my book on the air, because I think that's just going to be so much fun.
Yeah. Were you inspired by, I find a lot of people are inspired by Bogey and Maltese Falcon.
Oh, I love Bogart. But actually, I think most of my inspiration came from the radio programs. There's my favorite is Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar, which is he's an insurance investigator, and every episode something terrible happens to someone, and it's all about his case. And it always ends up basically like expense $1.27, cab fare and incidentals to blah blah blah, and then it goes on from there. But
right,
kind of
that's something that people don't think of. That sort of tells me about your open-mindedness, because other people, because of their loathing for insurance companies, can't accept the simple fact that the best investigators in the world are insurance investigators, because the money is compelling them to do it. Because they have a job, they work for a private company, and it's got to be done, and otherwise they don't get paid, and big money's on the line.
Yeah, they would rather pay an insurance investigator $6,000 for an expense report versus $500,000 to pay out an insurance claim. So that's absolutely true. Okay, so let's say you have a captive audience. Maybe you're like, maybe let's say, for argument's sake, you've got people sitting in their cars listening to this podcast. What do you want them to know about A Boy's Hammer?
It's fun. It's a fun book, and there's too little time in this world to waste on stuff that you have to make yourself do. And I vouch that if you like dark fantasy and you like, a little bit of detective noir and you don't mind the mix, I think you'll have a good time reading it. That's what I would say. Um, but also, if you need to know something about the book itself, uh, I'd say I would never do my readers dirty. I mean it. And the second that I can't write something where I don't mean every single word and it doesn't matter to me, you know, I I will peace out, and you
I,
won't.
I, I like that. That's a good contract with your reader, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the writers I love, I think that they're still doing it because they love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably the best reason to read a book, because you're reading a book from an author who believes in what they're doing. And that's important.
That's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
The only way.
So, probably the most important question we ever ask on this show, bar none, is where can people find you?
Amazon.
Of course.
Amazon, Amazon, and I'm not on any of the socials, but I am on Goodreads, and I do talk to people on Goodreads. And listen, if you're into books, I think it's the absolute best place. I sometimes I go down the rabbit hole. People put together book lists. Usually you can tell the difference between a legit criticism and one that's like, my book arrived late and I'm blaming the author.
Oh, yeah.
Those are my favorite.
Yeah.
The reviews are like, delivery man couldn't find my address, the number's right out front. I'm like, okay, but
like, you do know I didn't personally deliver your book, right? I mean,
yeah. It's like, so some of the, like, not just for books but for anything on Amazon, I think buyers assume a whole lot of power on part of the producer.
yeah. I mean, there's a really great YouTube video I shared recently. Basically, it's an Amazon insider look at what happens when you buy a book, and you look at the entire process of how the books get bound and moved out. It's fascinating. But
Can you,
yes,
can
we
you send that?
authors. Yeah, I can send it to you. It's a really interesting look at kind of the behind the scenes of how stuff happens.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'll say this. I'm pretty damn satisfied with with Amazon
mhm.
as a platform. I think a lot of the time people have a gut reaction, like a gut anti-corporation reaction, but I like the quality of the print books is great. It's printed here, it goes out really quick. I mean, I'm concerned with my readers. I can keep the books cheap and they can get it quick.
Yeah.
That's what matters.
Yeah. The big production company, or the big production facility where I get my books from when I hit order, is in North Carolina. So to get that up to Virginia doesn't take very long.
Yeah, yeah, and mine's in Delaware. So
Yeah.
I would be kind of, I'd be interested to know all the different places. But yeah, I figured I got it. You guys send me that video.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
say it is fascinating. It's worth sharing around, just because I don't know, it's kind of cool to see how that whole process takes place. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
far out, man.
Well, I have to tell you that I'm so thrilled you can join me on the show today, Alex. It's been my greatest pleasure to hang out with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it too, and yeah, I gotta say, not too many of the shows I've done have been with other authors.
Mhm.
Yeah, you got a good beat on things. That's my read, As a, like,
Thank you.
maybe that doesn't mean so much, like coming from it, like you obviously have a lot of experience, and it sounds from before when we were talking about your kids, like you've done things right. You get one kid in the service, another's getting a PhD, but for what it's worth, I think you got a good read on it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's I over the years I had been writing, and really this show is my attempt to share with everyone else who is out there in the world what I found out because I think that's the only way we all get better. And if the whole writing community does better, well, then there we go. It's all great.
Yeah, I'm 100%.
Yeah.
And we're lucky to be in a time, I think, despite what, a lot of people have sort of a golden age attitude, but we're in a pretty amazing time. There used to be nothing like this. And, to figure out how to write, was a painstaking process. And oftentimes there would just be a lot of stuff that was wrong out there that was a lot more popular than what was right. And what you get from a podcast, or like from Stephen's book on writing, is you're getting someone else's experience.
Yeah.
And even if you're never telling someone explicitly what to do, they can remember in the back of their mind something that they heard, and maybe that'll help guide them. That's my hope, because there would be nothing that would make me happier than to just have more great writers and more good books.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. Well, I will make sure and get the links to A Boy's Hammer in the show notes, so that people can go out and find it. Yeah, I mean, I think based on your passion alone, it's easy for me to say you people need to go out, check it out, take a look at it. If it sparks your interest, get a copy. Check my show notes, and you'll get the copy. Um, Again, thank you, Alex, so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And to you, my dear listeners, you are the best. Remember to hit that like button and check out my Patreon site to see more of what I'm doing. I am actually taking the videos and putting it on my Patreon site as additional content, so people can go see the uncut versions, because I think a lot of times I cut out that front matter, but this way they get to see all the really cool stuff. So the link to the Patreon site is in the show notes as well, and it's got all kinds of great information out there. So on behalf of All Things Writing, this is the Brian the Writer, and let me record that again, because that came out really weird. On behalf of All Things Writing, this is Brian the Writer, and my guest, Alex Glass, signing off. And that is how the magic happens.
Awesome. That was great.
Thank you. Yeah, so you're a really great guest, because so I actually interviewed Terry Brooks not that long ago.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, talk about, so funny story. I'm on my way to Dragon Con, I want to say. As I'm driving there, I was already set to moderate a panel where Terry Brooks was one of the guests. Well, I'm probably 13 minutes away, and the director of Dragon Con calls me and says, "Hey, the guy who was supposed to do the official, no, RavenCon, it was RavenCon. The guy who was supposed to do the official interview with Terry got sick. And I know that you do these interviews. Would you be interested in doing it?" And I'm like, oh my God. I literally don't need to think about that one more second. Yes, I will do it.
Yeah.
And it was great. It turned out really well. I asked them, and then I asked Mr. Brooks if I could, record everything. Made the recording, and it was my handheld recorder, so the volumes weren't quite right, but it turned out really well. And it was a wow moment. The interview was over. I sat in the library of the hotel, and I couldn't say anything for like 10 minutes after.
Were you like humming, like the glow inside of you, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I couldn't do anything for, I'm like, oh my God, I just sat down and did an interview of a lifetime. Wow.
That's so far out, man.
Yeah. But my point was that you have that same the same thing that Terry has. So I ask a question and I can just sit back and let you roll.
Wow, I appreciate that. It's like Listen, I love it. I love it. God, I love it so much. And I just want people to be happy reading, even if it's
Mhm.
if it's not, I just like want people to find good books, but good horror, you know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
God, I fucking mean it from my heart down to my fucking balls, you know? Like and that's why this stuff is so great.
It
It
is. And
yeah.
horror is such a it's subjective in that you can find you can find a book that for one person is horror and for another person is totally not. But it's if you want to find that thing, you can find it.
Yeah,
That's what
absolutely.
makes it cool.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's because there's so many oddballs that we don't that neither the fans or nor the authors neither have like the expectation
Mhm.
of being fenced in.
Yeah.
You, you know, it's just we're off to the races, hold on to your pants.
Yeah. That's very, very true. And I don't know, it's just all wonderful. It's all great. I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. And I'll give you back the rest of your day. Um,
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. I did have a great time. I
Good. I'm
did.
glad. I'll make sure and get the link out to you so you have it, and I'll include the publisher so they can do, or the publicist, and they can do whatever they do with that kind of information. But yeah,
All right. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Brian.
you're welcome. All right. Bye bye.
Bye.